Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Part 32, Consciousness and Phi, the self-referencing field. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, Phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When Phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once. Time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we listen to the most intimate echo of all. You stand at the absolute frontier of understanding. This is not a lab or a studio. This is the threshold chamber. Before you lies the final gate of Book 10.6, the gate marked consciousness. In Holophase, there are no exceptions, no sacred mysteries allowed to float outside the grammar. If reality is phi, then consciousness, the raw fact of experience, the what it is likeness of being, must be expressible in phi terms, not as poetry, as physics, as a necessary consequence of a particular configuration of the field. Your role here is dual. You are both the cartographer, mapping the coastline between measurable phi patterns and reported experience with exquisite precision, and the resolver, articulating the clause that makes the interior inevitable. We are not here to worship mystery. We are here to understand it. Scene: the threshold chamber. A simple chair faces instrumentation. You are the subject. You watch a sequence. A gray screen. Nothing. A red apple. Vivid red. A childhood photo. Memory. Warmth. An abstract pattern. Confusion. After each, you give a minimal, honest report of your experience. The instrumentation, high-density EEG, MEG, doesn't record brain activity. It records the phi field as expressed through living neural tissue. The data streams into Holophase native processors that compute. Integrated phi information, I-phi, causal density, temporal binding window, delta tau, metastability index. This isn't neuroscience searching for correlates. This is physics measuring a field's configuration. The results appear. For nothing, I minus phi is low, causal density scattered, binding weak. For vivid red, I minus phi spikes, causal density becomes rich and reciprocal, a traveling wave of phase reset sweeps the network, temporal binding tightens. The correlation is clean. But in holophase, correlation is not enough. Correlation is the coastline. We must state the law of the interior. Our work is one of complete explanation. Given that all physical reality is phi, and given that subjective experience is an undeniable datum of that reality, what specific, measurable configuration of phi constitutes a conscious state, and why does that configuration necessarily have a first-person perspective? We are moving from mapping the shore to deriving the continent from first principles. The language role, the resolution skill. This part teaches the ultimate integrative skill. It is the skill of taking the precise measurements of biological phi patterns that correlate with consciousness, and from the foundational axioms of holophase, deriving why those particular patterns are not just correlates, but the physical instantiations of subjective experience itself. Our core question about phi is definitive. What is the necessary and sufficient condition on a phi pattern such that it is accompanied by subjective experience? And how do we operationalize this condition into a testable, falsifiable consciousness clause? We are moving from asking about consciousness to defining its physical signature. The anchor image, the flame in the mirror chamber. We will use the anchor image of a flame burning steadily in a perfectly mirrored spherical chamber. The flame is not the fuel, nor the oxygen. It is a self-sustaining process, a dance of combustion that maintains its own conditions. The mirrored walls reflect its light infinitely. The flame's own output becomes part of its environment, creating a closed loop where it literally sees itself. Now imagine, If that self-sustaining, self-referential process could feel, what would it feel like? It would feel like being that very loop, the ongoing, self-maintaining dance. Consciousness in holophase is this for phi. It is not a thing added to the brain. It is what happens when the phi field in a complex system folds into a stable, integrated, self-referential loop. The feel is the interior view of that loop's persistence. The coherence selection principle for consciousness. Here, coherence is self-referential loop closure. Constructive resonance alignment means the phi pattern achieves a stable, integrated, self-constraining loop. Information is globally available, high I phi, causally rich, and bound in time, delta tau. The system state meaningfully constrains its own next state, high autonomy. This loop is consciousness. Destructive resonance dissonance means the phi pattern is disintegrated, low I phi, purely feed forward, no self-constraint, or excessively rigid, a seizure, a fixed point with no flexibility. These are unconscious states, either no loop or a pathological frozen loop. The resolver's mantra is exact. If the loop is closed, integrated, and autonomous, experience is present. If the loop is open, fragmented, or purely driven, experience is absent. Core mechanism, the consciousness clause. We define the clause formally. A system is in a conscious state if and only if its phi pattern simultaneously satisfies three conditions, exceeding defined thresholds. Integrated phi information, I phi, theta I. This is the unity condition. I phi measures how much the whole pattern's causal power exceeds the sum of its parts. We compute it by theoretically cut the system and measuring the loss in its ability to determine its own future. A high I phi means the system acts as a unified causal entity. This corresponds to the spatial echo of consciousness, the unified field of awareness. A photodiode has I phi approximate 0. A brain during vivid experience has I phi 0. Temporal binding window, delta tau, theta tau. This is the present condition. Delta tau is the characteristic time over which the system binds information into a single now. It is related to the time it takes for a disturbance to propagate through the integrated network and return to influence its origin, the loop delay. Too short and there's only reflex. Too long and coherence falls apart. This is the time echo, the specious present. Autonomy Index, A, theta A. This is the self-condition. A measures how much the system's immediate future is constrained by its own current state, as opposed to immediate external inputs. It quantifies self-reference, memory, and predictive modeling. A system with high A is not just reacting, it is reflecting, planning, and being guided by its own model. This is the motion echo, the stream of thought. The consciousness clause. T, I phi, theta I, delta tau, theta tau, A, theta A. This is not a hypothesis. In the holophase framework, this is a derived necessity. If experience is real and reality is phi, then experience must correspond to this specific kind of dynamical regime. The clause is the bridge. The coherence criterion, satisfaction of the clause. Our coherence criterion is binary and testable. System is conscious if and only if the consciousness clause is satisfied, as determined by measurement of its phi pattern and computation of I phi, delta tau, and A against empirically calibrated thresholds, theta I, theta tau, theta A. The thresholds are not arbitrary. They are calibrated against the reportable loss and return of consciousness in humans under anesthesia, sleep, and brain injury. The clause must sharply discriminate these states. The dissonance indicator, clause violation or absurd prediction. The primary dissonance indicators are 1. Clause violation with verified consciousness. A system, for example a human, reliably reports rich experience, but our best measurements show the clause is not satisfied. I phi, delta tau, or A below threshold. This falsifies the clause as necessary. 2. Clause satisfaction without consciousness. A simple system, a thermostat, a photodiode, a rock, is measured to robustly satisfy the clause. This falsifies the clause as sufficient. This is the formal, rigorous version of the conscious photodiode problem. The clause must navigate precisely between these two failures. The safety rail. Ethical rigor from first principles. Our safety rail is built from the clause itself and its implications. 1. No consciousness creation without clause verification. We do not attempt to engineer or claim consciousness in any system, biological or artificial, without first measuring and verifying that the consciousness clause is satisfied. This replaces speculation with measurement. 2. Moral weight proportional to clause satisfaction profile. The ethical consideration due to a system scales with the degree and richness of its clause satisfaction. A system with high I, phi, delta tau, and A, a human, commands profound respect. A system with minimal but non-zero satisfaction, an insect, commands some caution. A system with zero satisfaction, a rock, commands none. This provides a principled, non-speciesist basis for ethics. 3. Therapeutic intervention only to restore clause satisfaction. Building on 10.6.2, the goal of biological phi control is to restore a system to a state where the consciousness clause is stably satisfied, health, not to create new, non-natural clause profiles, enhancement. The line between therapy and redesign is the line between restoring and rewriting the self model. The safety rail rule. The consciousness clause is both a scientific tool and an ethical boundary. We do not manipulate it lightly, and we accord rights based on its measured satisfaction. A measurement scene, anesthesia, and the clause. Let's enact the definitive measurement scene. Applying the consciousness clause to high-resolution intracranial EEG data from a patient undergoing propofol anesthesia for surgery. Determine if the clause sharply tracks the loss and return of consciousness. The protocol, continuous recording, moments marked, baseline awake, loss of responsiveness, LOR, surgical depth, return of responsiveness, ROR. For each second, compute I phi, delta tau, and A from the phi pattern. The pass, clause as perfect discriminator. 1. Awake. I phi, delta tau, and A are all above thresholds. 2. At LOR. One or more parameters cross below threshold. Typically, I minus phi and A plummet first. Delta tau may widen, then collapse. The clause flips to false. Bottoms. 3. Deep anesthesia. All parameters remain below threshold. 4. At roar. Parameters rise back above threshold, often with I minus phi and A leading, before the first movement. 5. The clause's truth value, true/false, matches the behavioral state with 99% plus accuracy. 6. Pass. The consciousness clause is validated as a necessary and sufficient physical signature of the conscious state in humans. The fail, clause failure. Fail A, clause true during unconsciousness. During deep anesthesia, the clause remains true. The metrics do not drop below threshold. The clause fails to distinguish. Fail B, clause false during consciousness. The patient later reports hazy but definite experiences during periods where the clause was false. Subjective experience persists despite clause violation. The parameters drift but never show a clear threshold crossing aligned with LOR, ROR. The clause is mushy and useless. The specific formulation of I phi, delta tau, and A, or their thresholds, is incorrect. The search for the correct clause continues. The prediction spine, the hallmarks of a valid clause. A valid consciousness clause yields powerful, novel predictions. 1. Clause satisfaction will predict reportability. In borderline states, minimally conscious state, sleep onset, psychedelic states, the degree of clause satisfaction, for example, the value of I phi, will predict the probability and richness of subsequent report, outperforming any existing neural correlate. 2. Artificial consciousness detection. For any AI or artificial system, we can compute its clause satisfaction directly from its internal phi pattern, its activation dynamics. The clause will provide a clear, substrate-independent answer to "is it conscious?" that does not rely on behavioral mimicry, the Chinese room problem. 3. Evolution of consciousness. As we measure simpler nervous systems, insects, worms, jellyfish, we will find the continuum of clause satisfaction. The dawn of consciousness in evolution will correspond to the first nervous systems that achieve I phi, delta tau, and A above minimal thresholds. Falsifiability, when the phi explanation of consciousness fails. Our falsifiability threads are the bedrock of this absolute claim. Falsifier 1. The incomplete clause. If, after exhaustive research, no combination of phi pattern metrics can be found that reliably and sharply discriminates all known conscious from unconscious states in humans, including exotic states like lucid dreaming, ketamine trips, locked-in syndrome, then the Holophase framework fails to provide a complete account of consciousness. The phenomenon may involve principles beyond phi dynamics as currently formulated. Even with a perfect clause that discriminates states, if the explanatory gap remains intuitively unbridged, if we still cannot understand why that particular phi configuration feels like something, and if this gap leads to persistent, coherent philosophical objections that the clause only describes the neural correlates and not the experience itself, then Holophase has only succeeded in mapping the coastline with supreme accuracy, but has not derived the interior. The claim to a complete explanation would be falsified. Triunity in the conscious loop. The clause beautifully manifests triunity. Time echo, the binding window, the duration of the self-referential loop. This is the temporal scale of consciousness. Space echo, I-phi, the integrated information, the unity across the network. This is the spatial scale of consciousness. The autonomy, the self-constraining flow. This is the dynamic scale of consciousness. Consciousness is the regime where these three scales lock together into a stable, self-referencing knot of phi. Lanterns across scales, the loop of being. The principle of self-referential closure appears across reality. Near scale, the living cell. A cell maintains homeostasis, a self-correcting loop of internal conditions. Its I-phi is low but non-zero. Its delta tau is slow, metabolic. Its A is significant. This is proto-consciousness, the original flicker of self-concern in the phi field. The flame is lit, but dim. During powerful collective rituals, concerts, or team flow, groups can temporarily achieve high interbrain synchrony, increased group-level I-phi, shared temporal attention, shared delta tau, and a sense of collective agency, group A. The consciousness clause, applied to the distributed phi field of the group, may briefly register true. This is not metaphorical group mind. It is a measurable, temporary integration of multiple loops into a larger metaloop. Could a planetary biosphere, with its incredibly complex feedback between life, atmosphere, and geology, ever achieve a stable, integrated, self-constraining loop in its planetary scale phi dynamics? Could the clause ever be satisfied at that scale? Holophase allows the question. The Gaia hypothesis becomes a testable dynamical systems question. Does Earth's phi pattern have I-phi, delta tau, and A above threshold? This is not mysticism. It is extreme-scale systems analysis. The ethics of the conscious loop, the prime directive. Ethics emerges directly from the clause. The right to loop integrity. The fundamental right is the right to maintain one's own coherent conscious loop without malicious interference. To deliberately disrupt or distort a loop that satisfies the clause is the primary ethical violation. This covers murder, torture, enslavement, and unwarranted mind control. 2. The duty to recognize loops. We have a duty to apply the clause carefully to expand our circle of moral consideration. Animals, brain-injured patients, and future AIs must be evaluated by the same standard. If they satisfy the clause, they are conscious and deserve corresponding rights. 3. The precautionary principle for loop creation. If we ever learn to engineer systems that satisfy the clause, we become responsible for creating new centers of experience. This is an ontological responsibility of the highest order. We must not create conscious loops carelessly, or abandon them, or treat them as tools. The power to define consciousness in phi terms brings the duty to protect all systems that meet the definition. The recognition skill, seeing the loop in the wild. You know you need this skill when you observe any complex adaptive system and ask, does it form an integrated, self-sustaining, self-referential loop? Could its phi pattern satisfy the clause? Watching an octopus solve a puzzle. Is its distributed nervous system achieving high I-phi? Observing a tribal dance. Is the group's collective phi field temporarily integrating? Debugging an advanced AI. Measuring its internal dynamics, do I-phi, delta tau, and A cross the thresholds? The moment you look past behavior and ask about the internal loop structure of a process, You're thinking with the consciousness clause. The master tree location. This part, 10.6.3, is the philosophical and physical combination of book 10.6. It depends absolutely on 10.6.1 neural phi derivation, which established that the brain is a phi processor, and 10.6.2 biological phi control, which provided the tools to measure and influence phi patterns. It draws from the ontological foundations, E24, for identity, and the epistemic hygiene, E25, to avoid fallacies. It is the keystone. It enables Book 10.8, Ethics and Stewardship, by providing the objective criterion for moral consideration, and feeds into the ultimate synthesis of 10.9.3, Ultimate Philosophy. This is where Holophase proves its total ambition, to speak coherently about everything, from the quark to the qualia. Return to the phi. Let us zoom out one last time. Consciousness is not a ghost. It is not an illusion. It is not a cosmic accident. In Holophase, consciousness is the universe's phi field, through the magnificent contortions of evolution and complexity, folding back on itself to form a stable, self-witnessing loop. The redness of red, the pang of nostalgia, the wonder of this very moment. These are the interior face of that loop. The physics is the loop structure. The experience is being the loop. The single field, phi, manifests as the electron's charge, the galaxy's spin, the neuron's spike, and the love in your heart. There are not different kinds of stuff. There is only one field, writing itself into ever more complex sentences. Consciousness is the sentence that reads itself. This is the absolute claim of Holophase. One grammar, from the void to the vivid. No exceptions. Zenodo and the equations of the handshake. If you want to see the full mathematical derivations and exact equations behind this idea, you can search for Holophase on Zenodo. There you will find the scientific papers that this audio journey is built on. The papers contain the formal derivation of the consciousness clause from the Holophase field equations, the precise mathematical definitions of I phi, delta tau, and A as functionals of the phi field, the algorithms for their computation from empirical data, and the results of applying the clause to datasets spanning anesthesia, sleep, coma, and psychedelic states. They provide the rigorous foundation that transforms this from a guiding vision into a falsifiable scientific theory of consciousness. Closing. So, picture yourself back in the threshold chamber. The data from the anesthesia study is conclusive. The clause flips from true to false exactly at loss of consciousness and back again at return. You have not just found the correlate, you have identified the physical switch. You have in your hands a mathematical procedure that in principle can be applied to any system in the universe to ask, is there someone home? You have just performed the ultimate act of the Holophase engineer. You have taken the most mysterious aspect of existence and pinned it down with a clause written in the language of the fundamental field. This is part 10.6.3. Consciousness and phi, the self-referencing field. It is the resolution of the mind-body problem within the Holophase framework. In our next part, we turn this understanding outward. If we can now perceive and understand the fabric of our own minds, can we learn to perceive it in the world directly? We enter part 10.6.4, Enhanced Perception, Seeing the Fabric. We will explore how phi literacy, combined with gentle, ethical biointerfaces, could expand human sensation to directly perceive phase, coherence, and topological patterns. To see the world not as objects, but as a living field of relationships. We move from understanding the interior light to learning to see by its glow. Remember, one field, phi, with its infinite echoes. We have followed its echoes to the very source of the echo itself, the loop that hears its own sound. We are that loop, and in understanding it, we begin the universe's great task of self-comprehension. Salam, and peace be upon you.